A broke nurse helped a man in rags, not knowing he was a disguised millionaire who would show up to propose months later. Rain hammered the roof of Westbridge General Hospital with an unrelenting force, as if testing the limits of the old building. It was close to midnight, and the emergency room bristled with commotion, harried nurses shuffling gurneys, doctors snapping orders, and frantic relatives shouting to be heard above the downpour. Through sliding glass doors, the storm raged, lightning casting harsh silhouettes against the waiting area. Emma Wilson, a 25-year-old nurse nearing the tail end of a grueling double shift, felt every muscle in her body protest. She'd been on her feet for nearly 16 hours, tending to everything from broken bones to high fevers. Despite her exhaustion, she pushed aside her fatigue to greet the next wave of Emma's arrivals. Her ponytail drooped, hair plastered to her forehead in the muggy heat that clashed with the hospital's icy air conditioning. Outside, an ambulance pulled up, its red lights reflecting off deep puddles. As paramedics wheeled in more patients, Emma darted from bed to bed, checking IV lines, measuring blood pressure, and distributing reassuring smiles where she could. "Hey, Emma," shouted Dr. Sanders, a middle-aged physician with worry etched across his face. "We've got a potential cardiac case by the entrance. Go see what's up." She glanced across the crowded corridor. A man huddled by the wall, soaked through by the rain, wearing ragged clothes and clutching his chest. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with hair plastered flat and rivulets of water streaming off his sleeves. One of Emma's fellow nurses, Janelle, shot him a withering look. "Another homeless guy," Janelle muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. "Probably just wants a warm bed on a stormy night." Emma stiffened at the remark. "He's a patient," she said firmly. "I'll handle this." Without waiting for a response, she hurried over. Up close, the man's lips were tinged blue, his eyes dilated with pain. Emma knelt beside him, her scrubs soaking at the knees from the pooling water on the floor. "Sir, can you breathe? Are you feeling pain anywhere besides your chest?" He tried to speak, but all that emerged was a ragged groan. Emma carefully gripped his arm. "Let's get you inside." Dr. Sanders and Janelle exchanged glances, but Emma ignored them as she helped the man into a wheelchair. Every part of her ached from overwork, yet adrenaline propelled her onward. She navigated him through the throngs of sick and injured, found a free exam bay, and drew the curtains closed. Lightning flashed through a high window, illuminating the man's pale features. Emma grabbed a fresh towel, pressing it against his soaked hair and shoulders. "My name is Emma Wilson," she said softly. "I'm a nurse here and I want to help you." The man shivered, exhaling a tremulous breath. "Thank you," he managed, voice raw. At that moment, a dismissive voice cut through the curtain. "Emma, leave him. We're too busy for freeloaders tonight," came a colleague's scornful remark from somewhere in the corridor. Her cheeks burned with indignation. She wrapped her stethoscope around her neck, ignoring the noise outside. She'd seen too many patients turned away or overlooked because they didn't fit a convenient mold. "It's all right," she reassured the man. "We'll figure out what's causing this." Emma slipped the stethoscope into place over his chest. She heard rapid, uneven heartbeats, but no distinctive sign of a life-threatening condition. Next, she gently took his hand to measure his pulse. As soon as she touched it, her brow furrowed. His skin was smooth, unusually so, nothing like the rough, calloused hands she associated with people who'd been surviving on the streets for years. A subtle dissonance crept through her mind. This doesn't make sense. Still, he was clearly in distress, and that took precedence. "Let's get you warm and figure out what's going on," she said, focusing on her job. In the background, thunder rumbled like distant drums, as though the very night crackled with anticipation of something extraordinary about to unfold. Emma didn't get a chance to pause and reflect on the man's oddities. The ER was operating at its limits, and she had too many tasks to juggle. Still, she managed to slip back into his cubicle every few minutes, measuring his vitals, administering oxygen, and gently coaxing him to speak a bit about his symptoms. Between her quick visits, Emma's thoughts inevitably turned to her own predicament. She'd become a nurse out of love and empathy, but her financial situation was dear. Her mother, Linda Wilson, battled a degenerative nerve condition that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Month by month, Emma's paycheck vanished into prescription fees and specialist bills, leaving her with barely enough for rent and groceries. Late that same night, after making sure the man's vitals had stabilized, Emma scrounged up a small snack from the hospital vending machine, a packet of crackers and a fruit juice. She paid for them with the last crumpled dollar bills from her purse. She hated to admit how close to the edge she was. Her own fridge at home was nearly empty, and payday was still a week away. The homeless man's eyes opened as she returned. Weak but conscious, he tried to sit up, wincing from dizziness. Emma gently pressed a hand to his shoulder, urging him not to overexert himself. "We think you're severely dehydrated and your blood sugar's dangerously low," she explained, placing the crackers and juice on a small tray. "This should help, at least for tonight." His gaze flickered between the meager offering and Emma's tired yet compassionate face. He swallowed, words catching in his throat. "Thank you." She helped him sip the juice. In that moment, she realized something else about him. Despite his exhaustion, there was a dignity in the way he held himself, a certain careful articulation in his voice that seemed at odds with his ragged attire. Still, it wasn't her place to pry. People ended up on the streets for countless reasons: tragedies, mental health crises, unexpected job losses. Emma had learned never to judge. "Don't talk too much," she told him, adjusting his pillow. "Get some rest." He obeyed, though before she left, his voice emerged in a soft rasp. "Not everyone would do this for me." Emma offered a gentle smile, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Everyone deserves kindness," she said. He closed his eyes as if to shield an emotional response. A nurse from the next bay called for Emma, yanking her back into the tornado of tasks. As she rushed away, she couldn't shake the sense that she was glimpsing only the tip of an iceberg. There was a story beneath this man's silent gratitude. Hours later, as the ER slowed to a manageable chaos, Emma once again peeked into his cubicle. He was sitting up, nibbling the crackers, looking marginally better. Something about his posture struck her as refined, contradicting his outward appearance. He caught her gaze and murmured, "You're unusual." "Thank you." Emma's cheeks warmed. Anyone would do it, she demurred. Shaking his head, he disagreed in a hoarse whisper. "No, not just anyone." A pulse of confusion and curiosity coursed through her. But duty beckoned, and she nodded politely before slipping away. Despite her best attempts, she couldn't quell the swirl of questions rising in her mind. By the time the early rays of dawn filtered into the ER's wide windows, the storm had finally calmed. The heavy patter of rain on the roof softened, replaced by the routine bustle of nurses switching shifts and new patients drifting in. Emma's eyes stung from fatigue, but she forced herself to keep going for just a little longer. She headed straight to the cubicle where the man had been resting. A sense of responsibility nagged at her. She wanted to schedule lab tests, maybe consult a social worker about follow-up care. If he truly was homeless, he'd need a referral for a shelter or transitional service. When she drew back the curtain, the bed was empty. On the cot lay a neatly folded set of hospital scrubs, the ones she'd found for him the previous night. His battered jacket was gone, and so was he. Emma blinked in disbelief. She checked the hallway, the triage station, even the small bathroom off the corridor. Nothing. The other nurses, in the midst of shift change, either shook their heads or offered cynical shrugs. "Surprised?" Janelle said, flipping through a clipboard. "Told you he'd vanish." Emma's chest tightened. He wasn't well enough to just walk out. He was still shaky and needed more tests. Janelle gave a pointed sigh. "These people always slip away. They never wait for a billing conversation, right?" She snorted and hurried off to her next duty. Trying not to let annoyance get the best of her, Emma approached Dr. Sanders. The physician gave a neutral shrug. "If he was stable enough to leave on his own, we can't stop him," he reasoned. "We're not a detention center." Though technically correct, the nonchalance infuriated Emma. She felt protective of the man whose name she didn't even know, remembering how grateful he'd looked. Why would he just slip out without saying goodbye, or at least letting me do a final check? She scoured the immediate grounds after clocking out. Outside the hospital's sliding doors, the sidewalk was damp with lingering puddles, but there was no sign of him. Cars zoomed by on the adjacent street. The drab dawn sky hinted at the start of a humid new day. At last, she acknowledged defeat. Her shift was over, and she was running on fumes. She needed to head home, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before returning to her next shift. Still, unease gnawed at her. She boarded the bus for her tiny studio apartment, leaning her head against the window. Every bump in the road made her eyelids heavier, but thoughts of the mysterious patient kept her mind spinning. Who was he really? Where would he go now, still in precarious health? The bus pulled up near her complex. Emma stepped off and trudged upstairs. quietly letting herself into her cramped living space. In the faint morning light, she caught sight of her mother's photograph on the worn coffee table, reminding Emma of the steep bills that awaited her. She sighed, a potent blend of worry for her mother and the missing patient swirling in her chest. Weariness overcame her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't seen the last of him. Part of her felt foolish for hoping. Still, as she collapsed onto her bed, she whispered a silent prayer for his safety and for the strength to keep going. Emma's days blurred into an endless cycle of work and worry. Each time she showed up for her next shift, her colleagues teased her about searching the ER for the missing homeless man. Emma eventually stopped asking around. It was clear he was long gone. Yet in odd, quiet moments, she found herself glancing at the entrance, half expecting him to reappear. Outside of work, her personal situation teetered toward crisis. Between rent, groceries, and her mother's escalating medical bills, Emma's paycheck vanished quickly. Linda Wilson, Emma's mother, had been a pillar of strength when Emma decided to pursue nursing. But now Linda's degenerative condition confined her mostly to bed. Emma took on extra shifts too, sometimes 3 a week, to afford the experimental therapies Linda needed. An additional blow came 3 weeks after the man's disappearance. Emma made a minor documentation error in a patient's chart. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a simple correction. But the hospital administration had recently adopted a zero-tolerance policy for medical record mistakes, anxious about lawsuits. Their decision was swift, a formal reprimand and a temporary pay cut. The day Emma received the news, she was on a short break in the staff cafeteria. Sinking onto a plastic chair, she stared in dismay at the HR memo in her hands. A coworker, Nurse Alicia, tentatively patted her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Emma. They're really cracking down. It's so unfair." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. This pay cut meant she would barely cover half her mother's monthly medication. She'd have to choose which treatment Linda could skip, a heart-wrenching compromise. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She saw Ryan's name flash on the screen. Dr. Ryan Chambers, her ex-boyfriend. She hesitated, then answered, bracing herself for whatever he wanted. "Emma," he said, his tone cool but purposeful. "We need to talk. Meet me outside the staff entrance in 10 minutes. She couldn't fathom what possibly warranted a face-to-face meeting. He's probably heard about my pay cut, she thought sourly. Sure enough, when she met him by the rear exit, his expression was a mix of smugness and contrived sympathy. Ryan, a surgical resident from a wealthy family, had once dazzled Emma with his intellect and ambition. But over time she discovered a controlling, elitist streak in him. They'd broken up half a year ago, though he still sometimes acted as if they were involved. "How are things?" he asked, feigning concern as he leaned against his luxury car in the staff parking lot. Emma folded her arms. "I'm managing." He gave a pitying chuckle. "Heard about your pay cut. This hospital can be rough, especially if you lack certain advantages." He gestured at his car, an understated symbol of privilege. "If your finances are in shambles, I'm willing to help." She eyed him, suspicion mounting. Ryan's brand of help always came with strings attached. "What's the catch?" He shrugged, stepping closer. "Come back to me, Emma. We were good together. My family has connections. My father's on the hospital board. We could get your mother into better facilities, better specialists. She'd receive top-tier care." Emma's stomach twisted. Once she might have been swayed by the promise of security for her mom. But she recalled how Ryan manipulated situations to get his way. She forced a calm tone. "I'm not for sale, Ryan. I'll handle my mom's care on my own." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "On your own? With your pay cut? You're fooling yourself. And who do you expect to bail you out? Some random homeless man from the ER." His words cut deeper than she'd anticipated, reminding her of the stranger who had vanished. Fury burned in her chest. She turned on her heel, refusing to dignify his taunt with a response. Before she walked away completely, Ryan called after her, voice echoing in the dark parking lot. "You're making a huge mistake, Emma. Pride won't pay the bills." She hurried inside, tears pricking at her eyes, half from anger, half from the hopelessness of her situation. That night, after her shift ended, she had to face her mother's worried questions about finances. Linda, noticing Emma's distress, apologized repeatedly for being a burden. Emma held her mother's hands, insisting none of this was Linda's fault. But in the privacy of her small bedroom, Emma stared at the mounting medical bills scattered over her desk. She felt cornered, with no obvious escape. For an instant, her mind flitted to the memory of the mysterious man's gentle eyes. That fleeting sense of calm and gratitude he'd shown her. Why am I even thinking about him? She chided herself. He can't solve my problems. Yet some small, irrational part of her couldn't help but wish that a miracle would come from the same place she'd once offered kindness. A bleak week passed. Emma lived on instant noodles and extra coffee, pushing herself to the brink as she continued picking up additional shifts to fill the gap from her reduced pay. Each day felt heavier than the last. Her mother's condition seemed stable, but the bills piled up like a relentless tide. One chilly morning, Emma woke before dawn, having slept barely 3 hours after her late shift. She pulled on a threadbare sweater and trudged to the apartment's front door to retrieve the mail. The hallway was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescent flickering as usual. A small stack of envelopes lay on the ground, mostly junk mail, a few medical statements. With a weary sigh, she gathered them and closed the door. When she leafed through them at the kitchen table, a plain, nondescript envelope caught her eye. No return address, just her name typed on the front, Emma Wilson. Her brow furrowed. She carefully opened it, heart pounding in quiet apprehension. Inside was a single slip of paper, what looked like a cashier's check for $50,000. A typed note accompanied it. For your mother's care. Thank you for your kindness. A friend. Emma's gasp broke the early morning silence. She stared at the check, her brain scrambling to process what she was seeing. $50,000. That was more than she made in a year. Her heart hammered as she flipped the paper over, looking for any sign of forgery or a catch. It bore all the hallmarks of a legitimate cashier's check, drawn from a reputable bank. She read the note a second, then a third time. A friend. Who on earth could afford such generosity? Ryan's arrogance flashed through her mind, but the typed words didn't resemble his style at all. He would have gloated or demanded a personal meeting, and there was no reason for the hospital to give her such a sum out of nowhere. Trembling, she called the bank's helpline. The representative confirmed that the check was indeed real and valid. Emma's breath left her in a rush, and tears gathered in her eyes. She thought about her mother, the mounting bills, and the sense of desperation that had weighed on her for months. Suddenly, an impossible weight had been lifted, if she dared to accept it. She sat stunned for several minutes, waves of gratitude and suspicion mingling. Could this be from that mysterious man? It seemed absurd, yet her mind couldn't help but recall his smooth hands, his oddly dignified bearing. Thank you for your kindness. The words echoed the same gratitude he'd shown in the ER. A swirl of emotions engulfed her, relief, joy, wariness. She phoned Nurse Alicia to share the surreal news. They both squealed in astonishment, then Alicia's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. This is fate, Emma. That man you helped must have been someone with major resources. It's like in those stories where a disguised millionaire tests people's compassion. Emma laughed at the outlandish idea, but part of her heart couldn't dismiss it. Or it could be a secret benefactor from the hospital's charity wing, she reasoned, but even as she spoke, she knew the hospital would never just slip a check under her door. Later that day, the hospital administrators emailed an announcement about their annual charitable fundraiser, scheduled for the following week. It was a lavish event to raise money for improved facilities and patient welfare. Staff were invited, though usually few nurses attended, given the steep ticket cost. Emma had no intention of going. She lacked both the time and the formal attire. But that afternoon, the hospital board's secretary approached her with a personal invitation, courtesy of an anonymous sponsor, covering her entrance fee and more. Shock reverberated through her. She recalled the typed note in the envelope. Thank you for your kindness, a friend. Could it be the same person? Her thoughts whirled. She yearned for answers about the $50,000 windfall. Perhaps attending the gala would shed light on who had stepped into her life so dramatically. Emma stared at the glittering invitation, the check burning a hole in her purse, and felt something she hadn't experienced in ages, genuine hope. The night of the fundraiser arrived more quickly than Emma could have imagined. A sense of anxious excitement prickled at her nerves as she pulled on a simple navy blue gown borrowed from Nurse Alicia. She had never attended anything quite so fancy. A black tie event at the luxurious Westbridge Grand Hotel, complete with towering fountains and red-carpeted entrances. When Emma stepped out of her cab, she paused to take in the hotel's facade, richly lit arches and an ornate glass canopy sparkling under the bright city lights. What am I even doing here? She wondered, clutching her small handbag tight. She swallowed her nerves and followed the line of elegant doctors, board members, and philanthropic donors streaming inside. In the lobby, orchestral music played softly from a string quartet. A reception table offered name badges. Emma Wilson, RN, read the tidy lettering on her tag. She accepted it with a stiff smile, her heart pounding at the thought of possibly encountering the mysterious friend who had sent that life-changing check. Servers in crisp uniforms meandered through the crowd with silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Emma caught glimpses of hospital bigwigs. She recognized Dr. Sanders conversing with the CFO, and she saw Ryan leaning against a marble pillar, scanning the crowd. He glanced her way, eyebrows shooting up in surprise. She quickly looked away, not wanting another confrontation. A hush descended when the evening's host, an impeccably dressed board member, took the stage at the front of the grand ballroom. "Welcome everyone to our annual Westbridge General Charity Gala," he boomed into the microphone. Applause rippled through the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate those who go above and beyond in supporting our hospital's mission, caring for all, regardless of financial status." Emma found a seat at a round table half filled with doctors and donors, exchanging polite nods. Between the speeches and presentations, she scanned the room for any sign of that ragged stranger. If he truly is behind the check, would he show up like this? The notion seemed improbable. Midway through the program, an unexpected announcement came. The board member cleared his throat. "We have a special guest with us tonight, a philanthropist who's made a significant private donation to support patient bills, specifically for those with dire financial challenges. It is my honor to introduce our generous benefactor, Mr. Alexander Carter." Polite applause fluttered through the ballroom. Emma nearly dropped her fork. Alexander Carter? That name rang a bell. The hush grew deeper as the man took the stage. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a sleek black tuxedo that complemented his composed demeanor. His hair was neatly styled, his posture confident. Emma's pulse hammered. Something about his face was strikingly familiar, the shape of his jaw, the warmth in his brown eyes. His voice, though resonant and poised, carried a hint of that same quiet tone she remembered from the hospital. He began to speak, thanking the hospital for allowing him the chance to support charitable cases. Then he paused, scanning the crowd. When his gaze locked onto Emma's, her heart twisted. A gentle recognition flickered in his expression. She inhaled sharply, mind spinning. "It can't be." Alexander's voice trembled slightly. "I'd like to share a personal story. Some months ago, I experienced a deep crisis, both health-wise and emotionally. I'd lost faith in people's sincerity. So I disguised myself to see how strangers might treat me if I had nothing to offer, and I ended up in the ER at Westbridge General on a stormy night." A visible ripple passed through the audience, low whispers of confusion and intrigue. Emma's eyes widened. He's admitting he was that man. Alexander's gaze remained on her, unwavering. "During that night, I encountered a nurse. She did not look at me with judgment or pity. She simply treated me as though my life mattered. When I recovered enough to slip away, I couldn't forget her compassion. It restored my faith that genuine kindness exists." The room fell into hushed awe. Ryan, who stood across the room, looked dumbfounded, eyes darting between Alexander on stage and Emma. "The donation I made to the hospital," Alexander continued, voice thick with emotion, "was in large part to ensure that Nurse could continue her mission without the burdens that plague so many underpaid healthcare workers. She gave me a gift that night, a renewed belief in humanity, and I wanted to return that favor." He lifted the microphone slightly, swallowing hard as though steadying himself. "I never knew if I'd see her again. But I'm here now to publicly thank Emma Wilson, the nurse who went out of her way to help a man she believed was homeless and broke." A wave of gasps and applause erupted. All eyes pivoted to Emma. She felt every nerve in her body firing at once, shock, embarrassment, and a fierce surge of gratitude. Slowly, she rose from her chair, hardly aware of the cameras flashing or the thunderous clapping around her. Alexander stepped down from the stage, moving through the crowd. Despite her swirling emotions, Emma found herself walking forward, meeting him halfway. He reached out, gently took her hand, and leaned in to speak over the noise. "I never got to thank you properly," he murmured, his voice low and sincere. Emma's throat closed up. She stared at this man, no longer in rags, but the same eyes, the same quiet dignity. She recalled how fragile he'd seemed in the ER cubicle, how she'd bandaged his wounds, shared her last few dollars on a vending machine snack. She could hardly believe the transformation. Yet here he was, gazing at her with genuine warmth amidst a sea of astonished onlookers. And though confusion whirled in her mind, a sense of profound relief and wonder spread through her chest. Within moments, the gala's planned schedule unraveled into a swirl of excited chatter and camera flashes. As Alexander guided Emma toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, hospital administrators approached, shaking his hand and offering thanks. He responded graciously, but his attention clearly rested on the stunned nurse at his side. She managed a whisper, mind still reeling. "Alexander Carter, you're the—" He gave a small nod, looking almost apologetic. "I had to test the sincerity of those around me. It's complicated." Emma could hardly speak. I don't understand. You're a millionaire." But that night, "I was in the midst of my own crisis," Alexander explained, voice tight with emotion. "I lost someone close to me about a year ago. The circumstances made me question everyone's motives, my so-called friends, business partners. I stepped away from my responsibilities, disguised myself, and wandered for weeks, wanting to see if genuine kindness still existed or if people only cared about my money." Emma remembered the softness of his hands and the dignity in his posture. It all clicked into place. He wasn't a typical homeless individual. He was a man grappling with heartbreak, hidden beneath tattered clothes. She swallowed, tears threatening to blur her vision. "You left so suddenly, I worried about you." His gaze warmed. "I didn't mean to vanish. I panicked. I realized how easily you saw my vulnerability, and I wasn't ready to face that. But I never forgot what you did, especially when I learned about your financial struggles, your mother's illness." As the crowd pressed in, wanting to speak with Alexander, he placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Let's step outside for a moment. We need real privacy." They slipped into a side hallway that led to the hotel's terrace. Cool night air greeted them, and the city lights twinkled below. Emma inhaled deeply, her heart pounding. It felt surreal to stand here, alone with the man she'd once offered help to in a cramped hospital cubicle. At first, they simply stared at each other. Then Alexander broke the silence. "I deposited that check for you, hoping you'd accept it as gratitude. When the hospital's fundraiser approached, I saw the chance to come forward publicly. But there's more I want to offer you, Emma." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You've changed my life, and my mother's." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands. "Your compassion changed mine." They talked in hushed tones, Emma recounting the struggles of working 2 jobs, the heartbreak of nearly losing her mother to an incurable disease, and her frustration with the harsh realities of hospital bureaucracy. Alexander listened intently, occasionally pressing her hand, his eyes reflecting empathy. Emma asked about his own grief. He revealed how he had lost his sister to a rare condition, and that her passing opened his eyes to how easily people around him fawned for his money rather than caring for who he was. That disillusionment drove him to test humanity by living in disguise. A short silence fell, heavy with unspoken emotions. The muffled sounds of the gala drifted through the glass doors. Emma's heart thrummed with an intensity that surprised her. She felt an inexplicable closeness to Alexander, as though they'd shared a bond far beyond a nurse-patient dynamic. Then, with the city lights illuminating his profile, Alexander reached into his tuxedo pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Emma," he said softly, voice trembling, "my gratitude to you goes beyond mere money. Since that night, every day has been shaped by the memory of your kindness. Meeting you shattered my cynicism, you gave me hope. I realize this might seem sudden, but life is too short to let love slip away." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring that caught the reflected glow of distant street lamps. "Will you let me share my life with you? Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, and for an instant, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the soft music from the ballroom. Part of her mind screamed that this was absurdly fast. They'd only truly spent one night in each other's orbit. But another part recalled how she had risked her meager resources for him without hesitation, how deeply he'd impacted her life in return. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Alexander, I'm overwhelmed. This is so sudden. I barely know you, and yet..." He stood there, gaze unwavering. "I know. I don't want you to feel pressured. I only want you to know the depth of my feelings." If your answer is no, I'll respect that. But I had to tell you. Emotion coursed through Emma. She thought of her mother, now receiving the best care possible, of her own battered finances salvaged by his gift, of the sincerity in his eyes when he admitted his heartbreak. A swirl of reason and emotion tangled in her mind. Drawing a shaky breath, she gently covered the ring with her hand, not rejecting it, but not quite placing it on her finger either. Can I have time to think? A look of deep relief crossed Alexander's face, as if fearing outright refusal. Of course, take all the time you need. My feelings won't change. They stood there for a moment, hands entwined, the ring glimmering in the space between them. Emma's heart was torn between caution and an undeniable pull toward the man who had so drastically entered her life. Emma returned home from the gala that night in a daze, her mind too abuzz for sleep. She placed the velvet box carefully in a drawer, next to the precious cashier's check that had rescued her family from financial ruin. For the next few days, she navigated a surreal limbo, fulfilling her nursing duties at the hospital while also spending her off hours meeting Alexander in quieter, more personal settings, away from prying eyes. Their conversations grew increasingly intimate. Alexander shared the stories of his childhood, his family's philanthropic legacy, and how wealth had become both a blessing and a barrier. Emma talked about her father's passing when she was young, her decision to pursue nursing to help others, and the heartbreak of watching her mother's health deteriorate without adequate funds. People at the hospital buzzed with rumors, word traveled fast. Some staff gossiped that Emma was only in it for the money, while others, remembering her generosity, championed the love story with excitement. Ryan avoided Emma altogether, humiliated by Alexander's presence and overshadowed by a far more sincere show of support. Eventually, Emma introduced Alexander to Linda Wilson. Seeing him in the modest living room of her small apartment was both jarring and heartwarming, the elegant millionaire removing his expensive shoes at the door, humbly greeting Emma's ailing mother with a bouquet of bright flowers. Linda, propped up on the couch with pillows, beamed at him. "You're the one who saved us from those bills," she asked, tears in her eyes. Alexander simply took Linda's hand. "Your daughter saved me first in ways I can never fully repay." Emma watched as Linda peppered him with questions about his life, occasionally admonishing him to sit down and not fuss. A soft warmth spread through Emma's chest. He's so genuine with her. Over time, Emma couldn't ignore how deeply she and Alexander connected. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they shared a passion for caring about those in need. Alexander even proposed establishing a charitable organization that would provide free or subsidized treatment for homeless patients, an initiative inspired by Emma's unwavering compassion that fateful night. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through a local park, Alexander paused by a rose garden in full bloom. He turned to Emma, the sunlight catching the gentle flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I asked you a question that night, about whether you'd marry me," he said quietly. "I don't want to pressure you, but I need to know if there's hope." A tender smile curved Emma's lips. She recalled the swirl of emotions that had overwhelmed her at the gala. Now, after spending time with him, truly getting to know his heart, she felt a steady certainty blossoming in her chest. She retrieved the small velvet box from her purse and opened it. The ring sparkled, reflecting the warm glow of the afternoon sun. "I've thought so much about this," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes again. "Part of me was afraid of what people would think, or that our differences were too great. But I don't care anymore. I love who you are, Alexander, not what you have." He exhaled a breath he'd been holding, relief washing over his face. "Emma," she nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I'll marry you." Laughter and tears mingled as Alexander swept her into a hug, the rose garden's sweet fragrance enveloping them. In that moment, any last traces of doubt dissolved. Shortly thereafter, they announced their engagement. Together, they founded a charity to aid patients facing financial hardship, mirroring the life-changing generosity Emma and her mother had received. At the hospital, Emma's co-workers eventually rallied around her, many moved by her sincerity and the couple's philanthropic vision. On a crisp autumn evening, Emma and Alexander wed in a small but joyful ceremony. Linda, smiling brighter than she had in years, walked Emma down the aisle with the aid of a sturdy cane. Only a handful of close friends and family gathered under an arbor draped in flowers. As they exchanged vows, Emma felt the resonance of every challenge and every act of kindness that had led them here, bound together by compassion, renewed faith, and an unwavering belief in the power of love. Thank you for journeying with Emma and Alexander as one act of kindness changed both of their lives forever. If you found hope or inspiration in this story, we invite you to subscribe to the Soul-Stirring Stories channel. Our tales celebrate the extraordinary power of compassion, perseverance, and unexpected twists of fate that bring people together. Don't miss out on future stories. Subscribe now and continue exploring the magic of heartfelt storytelling.